Metal Gear Solid 3 is undoubtedly the most popular entry in Hideo Kojima's flagship series, to the point that after facing criticism for firing Kojima and releasing the disastrous Metal Gear Survive, Konami greenlit a full-blown remake releasing this year. Allegedly. So if this game is so beloved that it's their go-to re-release to save face, then it must be true what everyone says and this is the best game in the series. But my question is how? Sons of Liberty isn't perfect. Spoilers for that review, but I gave it a 9 out of 10. It can be improved upon. But I just can't imagine how Hideo and his team at Konami could have one-upped predicting the new age of the world that I would live in 3 years before I was born. Needless to say that I was very interested to see what was in store as I played Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Spoilers ahead for a game that released 20 years ago. Now let's get into this review. One thing that I love about this whole series, but especially in Snake Eater, is that actually playing the game is raw as fuck and it knows it, especially with this needlessly cool opening. I was really put off by the gameplay in my first session, which was basically just Virtuous Mission for a couple of reasons. First and foremost was because Major Zero tells you that you need to be completely invisible and off the enemy radar, implying almost no kills or takedowns, and he tells you that you need to be untraceable down to picking up bullet cartridges. That is way too far, and I'm glad Konami realized that because you don't actually have to, that's just a story thing. And usually I wouldn't take that literally, but when you have the Major in this game and the Colonel in the last two blatantly telling you to press triangle in the tutorial and telling you what to do over the codec when you're stuck, it's easy to take too much stock in what they have to say. Another reason I was put off was because there's a lot of cool and very useful things you can do that I wish I knew about sooner. Knowing about all the variations of CQC grabs and finally realizing that you have to use the D-pad to sneak up on enemies is what really made the game click for me and made the game way more fun. Given how the D-pad and the analog stick did the exact same thing in almost every game in the PS2 generation, it's really weird that I had to find that out for myself, but they blatantly told me, hey, press R1 to stare at tits. All that being said though, and while I do think this game could greatly benefit from crouch walking, I adore the gameplay loop of this series. I've gushed about the basics of the gameplay in the last two reviews, but the addition of camera control in this game does wonders for replayability and overall fun factor, as well as the open world with fantastic map layouts, level design, and sound design. The game is full of set pieces and encounters that are super fun, like planting the C3 on the fuel tanks around the Shagohod. The camouflage system is a great addition, especially with the jungle environment, and they actually pulled off making micromanaging fun. Seeing the healing and food system for the first time made me roll my eyes out of my skull. But I really love hunting for resources, taking care of bullet wounds, and having to survive on the environment's terms. I think it's because similar to Red Dead 2 and feeding and brushing your horse in that game, I actually care about what I'm micromanaging and they're not just systems. The game still isn't perfect though. You really see this game's age whenever you have to aim a weapon in the sidecar, and there's a whole section where you have to guide Eva through the jungle, and then halfway through she says her legs stopped working. So you have to find where you need to go, then take out the enemies in your path, so you can then go back and spend minutes dragging her to the other side of the jungle. I mean, she is pretty well written and likable, so it does suck to see her fading from her engine. Bitch, are you running? Anyways, this game's version of Foxhound or Dead Cell called the Cobra Unit is really cool as well. My favorite member is obviously the boss, which I'll get into her and her boss fight in the character section of the video, but other than that, I love the end. He's like a Poison Ivy sniper. He's so fucking cool. He's photosynthetic and spends all of his time resting and conserving energy purely to stop you in one of the coolest boss fights I've ever played. It is derivative of MGS1, as it's basically an upgraded version of the second Sniper Wolf fight, but if they're gonna rip themselves off, I'm glad they're ripping off one of the best fights in the series I've played so far. Like, the Fear fight was cool and very goofy as he keeps saying his name every time he lunges at you. But it was super easy when you realize you can use the thermal goggles if you need to. But in the Ends fight, he's camouflaged so well, and it's such an uphill but doable battle that I felt like I needed the thermal goggles. There's just something so cool about winning in a situation where the odds are stacked against you tactically, instead of in terms of power, like the first Vulcan fight. I do like how he goes Super Saiyan, and it's such a cool detail that the screen gets a cold filter over it whenever he uses his electricity. But the fight goes from impossible to fail as soon as you realize how he works. And he has the same problem Liquid had in the first game where he just won't fucking die. Even when Groznygrad is blown up by the bomb that was used specifically to destroy the Shagohod, he survives by climbing into the Shagohod. Ocelot has a great fight at the beginning, albeit frustrating when you're getting shot at from all directions from him and his goobers. The Pain's fight is interesting on paper with hiding in the water, but I feel like it was poorly executed with how easily he can spot you and the time it takes to aim. And while it's not really a boss fight, so to say, I gotta talk about the Sorrow. This game does what I was hoping The Last of Us Part 2 would do, and shows you the impact of what you've done throughout the game. Nacob Jacob talked about this at length, but it forces you to face everyone you've killed in the game up to that point, which not only makes you think about the moral ramifications, but also means the easier you make the game for yourself, the harder this fight is gonna be as more ghosts will spawn that can damage you. This is probably where Metal Gear Solid 3 innovates the most. And I don't really like it. Here's the deal. 1, the Sorrow looks like a member of Organization 13, and 2, I would really feel bad about killing all of these people and ripping them away from their families and causing all of this pain if they weren't terrorists. I am very glad that this is in the game. It's a great idea, and I'd rather see a game swing and miss over not swinging at all, but this would work way better and hit way harder in a game like The Last of Us, where you're fighting other survivors who care about each other and not terrorist soldiers hell-bent on world domination and who work for people who nuke buildings for fun. And there's one last boss fight with someone else from Cobra Unit that I haven't mentioned yet, and you probably haven't noticed. And that's because I'm gonna talk about the fight with the Fury. And his total minutes of screen time in this game is exactly however long it took you to beat him. I don't know why, but we never see the Fury before his boss fight, and that really sucks because he's one of the most interesting members of Cobra. But his fight is bullshit! The reason why is because he's basically Firefly from Arkham Origins, except in that one, Alfred doesn't spew bullshit in your ear that gets you nowhere. This guy is very intimidating, and fire is very lethal in this game. So before the fight really started, I called up Major Zero on the codec. He told me that to beat him, I needed to shoot him from behind because I have no chance facing him head to head. So I think, oh, that must be because his gas tanks are on his back, and that's his weak point. So I kept on trying to get behind him and shoot him, and that worked for about half of his health bar, but after that, he moved way too fast and too randomly for me to get around him undetected. I just kept getting fucked over again and again until I got angry and mag dumped him. And it worked! It literally does not matter where you hit him. He is completely vulnerable. All you have to do is be far enough away that you don't get hit by his fire, which isn't even necessary, and you just shoot him and run away when he gets up. I couldn't beat this boss fight for the longest time because the game was lying to me. So basically, fuck you, Major, and I hope your plane crashes. While we're in one of my classic patented Carter McSwaggins bitch fits, we may as well talk about how this game is aged. Yeah, the game doesn't look the best graphically, even in the Master Collection version, which I played, but I don't give a fuck. It came out in 2004. Games weren't exactly looking too hot back in those days, and honestly, Snake Eater is still pretty impressive with the bloody clothes when you get shot, the bubbles in the water, and the reflections in the raindrops that hit the camera. But there are still some things in this game that can't really be fixed by a graphical uplift. One minor thing is that the lip movement is probably synced to Japanese audio because it is definitely not synced to English, and this is one of the most 2004 games I have ever played. It is such a product of its time in the sense that it reminds me of stupid bullshit from the early 2000s, especially with what was going on with Resident Evil back in those days. And to see what I'm talking about, all you have to look at is the motorcycle shenanigans. Ocelot's bike catches air off of nothing. Eva's femurs should be gravel. One of the most outlandish is that Eva You know what? Just watch this. I'd hate to ruin it for you. Ocelot just keeps getting fucked over in this game, man. I do like him overall in this game, though. It's cool to see him when he's young, and I hope to see his dynamic with Solid Snake in MGS4 from the angle of his respectful rivalry with his father, Big Boss. He doesn't really feel like the same character he was in MGS 1 and 2, though. He still has that drive to leadership, but he was just a little flat in the first two, so it's a bit jarring to see him with so much personality here. And while it does lead to great moments between him and Snake in this game, I don't need to see the origin story of how Ocelot got his revolver, or how he first got interested in his hobby of torturing video game protagonists. And he is really goofy too. Like how he plays Russian roulette with the 3 pistols to imitate Alright, I am getting so sick of this series and piss. It's like Olga's super detailed armpits, man. Hideo or someone on his writing team is flying way too close to the sun. It was funny in the first game. Then it was funny in the second game because it was another Emmerich, but then you did it again in the second game, and twice in the third. Stop! Where was it? Oh yeah. Ocelot is goofy, and so is Sokolov, but I really like him. He's a funny guy, and I love his ties to this alternate world history they've created. Obviously, he designed the Shagohod, but I really like how he and his design were essentially brought in to replace Granin and his plans for the first Metal Gear, and how maybe Granin knew Otakod's dad or granddad. I really appreciate, too, how Hideo Kojima shares his love of movies, not only through the characters' dialogue, like when Paramedic tells Snake about Godzilla, but also through the spaghetti western stereotypes, like Ocelot's spurs and when the screen splits right before his boss fight. Speaking of the dialogue though, it can be hit or miss, best shown when Volgin explains the philosopher's legacy.
This explains why the United States and the Soviet Union were able to steal away the best scientific minds in Germany as soon as the war ended.
Bro, he said this explains why, like he's talking directly to the audience. And I did really like Eva too, despite her selective leg injury. And I really like how her last twist actually gives autonomy to China, the third country of the philosophers, who have had no inclusion up to that point. Especially when you remember that she didn't know the passcode when she first appeared. And I only started to suspect that she might be Tanya right before they revealed it with the boot scuff, which was handled excellently, but I do wish that they had spaced out the focus on the boot scuff more instead of having an instant payoff. The best part of the characters in this game though, Eva included, is their relationships to Snake. Easily my favorite scene of hers is when she's in the cave with him and the music is playing, and it hits so hard when he pushes her away. And you want to talk about emotional impact? This is the first game I've played in the last 6 months that made my eyes well up, because holy shit, that final fight with the boss is brutal. It sucks because it's so much fun and is pretty much fighting yourself, but I do not want to kill her. It was hard to take her seriously at first because it's the same voice actress who plays Pearl from SpongeBob, but the emotional complexity of their relationship only evolves over the course of the game. And I know they hint at it a lot, to the point that they're practically bonking me over the head with it, but biologically or not, that's his mom. Whether a defector or not, all she wants is to see the world in one piece, and she knows that for him to move on, he has to take her place. And as you slowly wear her down, and her blood on her outfit makes her easier to see, the theme song of the game starts playing, and you realize that the whole time, it's been about her dying so he can live. Even from the beginning, he's her kid. Snake is the son of the leader of the Cobra unit, and the evolution of wearing her headband from a symbol of vengeance to a symbol of surpassing her reflects the plot in a brilliant way. It is truly one of the most emotionally impactful endings I've ever seen in a video game. Until one meowing bastard ruins it! This game had the perfect ending, until Major Ocelot decides that he wants to fuck with Snake. He jumps on the plane, fights Snake, plays Russian roulette with him, and the bullet that fires is a fucking blank. And then he says, "Hey man, just wanted to let you know you're a pretty cool guy. Anyway, I'm gonna fuck off." Why? What was the point of that? It's not even like Snake won his respect in that moment and Ocelot ended up helping him because of it. Because it was Khrushchev that called off the fighter jets. I honestly cannot think of any reason for that plot point to be there. They honestly didn't even need to have Ocelot chase Snake and Eva. They could have just ended it when he does Snake a favor and gives him his guns before the Volgin fight. And besides, that's not really the only thing that spoils the ending. Given the fact we already know that Solid Snake looks exactly like Big Boss, it's clear that's who we're playing as, and the boss is gonna have to die in this game. And I'm not really sure that the boss being a hero really helps the plot. If anything, it kind of contradicts it, as well as the character. It doesn't take away from how sad I was to see her die, and I do like that in some small way she will be remembered as a hero at her grave, but her actually not being a defector and being screwed into it by the government through Volgin's actions lessens the speech she gives to Snake at the beginning about loyalties. She's preaching about being loyal to a mission over a country, while still being loyal to her country. I mean, it does make sense whether she's a defector or not, but it seems almost like a cheap way to buy last-minute sympathy points for her by making it so that America actually did have the same mission as her the whole time. It just seems like an unnecessary and last-minute addition. I also feel like the games are getting a bit repetitive in plot. The last 3 games consist of infiltrating a base, taking down superpowered terrorists, getting captured, tortured, and then escaping with nothing and resuming the mission. And while we're in the negatives of the story, I didn't hate it, but I wasn't the biggest fan of the Philosopher's Legacy plot. Yeah, $100 billion would definitely help Volgin take over Russia and fund his military and weaponry, especially in 1964. But like, dude, you already have the most advanced and powerful tank in the world that money can buy. That should be priority number 1. But that being said, I love this universe's alternate history with this never-ending Cold War and how Russia pulled out of the Cuban Missile Crisis to instead focus on building the Shagohod. It's super cool how clunky and awkward it moves since it's basically the first iteration of a Metal Gear, and I think it's really interesting how the Cobra unit and Volgan's insurgency are the real villains of the story, and the US, Russia, and China are all trying to avoid conflict as much as possible. And one of the most satisfying things was not understanding why the series is called Metal Gear for my whole life, and finally finding out the reason, and it's super fucking cool. I don't know when Hideo came up with this in the series, but it being called Metal Gear as it's the military arms equivalent of the human race's missing link, and it being the next step in weapon evolution and mimicking humanity's bipedal transition is something I could have never come up with in a million years. I'm also dumb as fuck though, which shouldn't be a surprise. But the entire game, I was asking what the hell happened to Adam, and then when Ocelot tells Snake his name is Adamska, I couldn't connect the dots until they blatantly told me in the stinger. And speaking of, I'm really glad this game is a prequel, as the stinger at the end of Sons of Liberty wasn't as interesting to me, and I could really use a break from the Patriots story, especially now that I have some context of how they came to be from the Wise Men's Committee. But now that I did have that break, I am very excited to see the sequel to this game, Metal Gear Solid 4. Even if it hasn't improved from Snake Eater at all gameplay-wise, I'm sure to love it. I really am glad I finally got around to playing this series, this entry especially, as even though the plot is much more straightforward than the last two, I like it more. Even now, I still don't and never have understood why people like the clone Solid over the original Big Boss. I'm really torn between a 9 and a 9.5, but I think I'm gonna give Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater a 9 out of 10. That is the same score as Sons of Liberty, but I do think I like Snake Eater more. Let me know down in the comments if you want to see a video of me ranking the series once I've played them all. But yeah, even though the Ladder Climb was incredibly overhyped, I love this game and am super glad I played it. It ended up aging incredibly well. Okay, maybe not.